For all those that are live in here, thank you for joining. It's already our third episode of the KQL Cafe. And yeah, it's again Johnny and myself. Yeah, I can say that we spent quite some free time in preparation, and I must say, the preparation is as much fun as the show itself. So I hope that this month we can also bring some KQL love to you, some inspiration, and as always, your feedback is highly appreciated. So today, later, we have Matt Lowe from Microsoft, and maybe Matt, you want to give a brief introduction about yourself?
Yeah. Regarding your comments about the most valuable guests, I mean, you guys are already here, so I don't know why you're saying that's me. But greetings, everybody. It's great to meet you virtually today. As mentioned, my name is Matt Lowe from Microsoft. I'm a program manager too, or product manager, as they're gonna, change our names for the Microsoft Sentinel product. And so, joining you today as I've co-authored a solution recently about learning KQL. And I've also helped with another solution that I'll be talking about later today. So it's great to meet you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so our agenda. What's new? Working with IOCs. We're doing a little bit of learning KQL. Today, Johnny will
I'm
show
still
us
seeing your first page.
Oh, really? Okay. Not coming?
I'm seeing a slide 2 out of 22.
Okay. Let me.
I don't even see any slides, so.
Oh.
But it wouldn't be a get together if it wasn't for team issues. So.
Okay. Yeah. So,
there we go.
Okie dokie. Great. So yeah, we have some new things, KQL, or let's call it related to KQL. Then we talk a little bit about working with indicators of compromise. Then Johnny will speak about external data today. We have some things around KQL tools. And then Matt will talk about his life in KQL. And finally, we'll present what Johnny and I have been doing this month on KQL. And last but not least, as always, we have the KQL Challenge of the Month. So, something, what's new, and again, it's not always just about the language, but, what we can do related to the language. And one of the things we wanted to highlight is the fact that now in Azure Sentinel, or I should actually say Microsoft Sentinel, we can now create large watch lists based on files that we have loaded into an Azure storage account. Now, as always, the slides are only for backup purposes. So let me quickly switch to the live demonstration. And that should be here. Yeah, great. So what we can do now, and I always like blog posts and demos where you really see the beginning and not just the end result, so that people can reproduce things. So imagine you created your storage account, and that's one I'm not going to do here because that's not too difficult. And you just say create a new one, and what you get in the end is that you create a container. I created a container called TI data, and in that container I basically uploaded a simple text file. And once that text file is uploaded, I actually create a so-called key that token key that I need to copy. That's all I need as a reference to my large file that I want to upload into a watch list, or that I just want to upload because I'm going to access the file in KQL directly. So today I'm going to show you both methods, also a little bit as a bridge to what Johnny is going to talk about in much more detail later, and that's the external data parameter. Good. So assume we are in the need of a watch list because we want to import large amounts of data. In this demonstration, I'm using a file with a lot of IP addresses. Now, to be very honest, as I was thinking of this proof of concept, I thought, well, probably you rather import your IP addresses into threat intelligence, or you directly reference it through external data. Nevertheless, you know, if you have a large file, if you wanted to have that in a watch list, this is what you basically would do. You would say, okay, I'm going to create a new watch list. You give it a name, demo 1, demo 1, demo 1. And then actually I have to go here and I copy that to my clipboard. And now the big difference, before we would select, you know, to open a local file. But now we're going to say we want to pull the data from an Azure storage blob. So now in here, we're pasting that key. And as we paste it, we immediately see it's going to read the content of the file that we have loaded in our storage account. I provide a search key, which in this case is my IP address. And I say next. And I say create. Now you will notice that unlike with smaller watch lists, which also can take a few minutes, this one actually will take quite some time. So if I go to demo, you will see here a note that the upload is in progress. And if I quickly jump, just to give you an idea of how long that could take, I'm going to go to Azure Monitor. Where are we? Azure Monitor, where are you? I don't want Azure Monitor for, here we are. Are we correct here? Monitor, yeah. And where was it? My activity log. Yeah. And if I go to last 24 hours, I think it was last night when I did that. Wait. Yeah. And here you see create watch lists. And you will notice that, you know, it can take quite some time, up to 24 minutes for that huge watch list to be loaded. Yeah. But I prepared this already. So here we have the list I imported yesterday, 15,000 roles. And now, as usual, I can go and use that watch list in my KQL queries. So demonstration 1 would be actually my watch list. So I now have the data in my watch list, and I now can use that watch list to correlate the information, for example, to find devices that had anything to do with those IP addresses. So as I run this, I get those devices, luckily my MGE Evo Lab devices. And apparently I didn't do anything, but as we can see, you know, the bad guys are constantly hammering on port 3389, so RTP, trying to get in. And then I can, of course, also do the same and a reference that just imported, uploaded file in my blob storage directly by actually providing again the key, and say run, and I get exactly the same result. So that's what we had prepared as, let's call it what's new. Then we have another thing that might be of interest. And for that, I'm again gonna toggle between my screens. And that's in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So for those that use Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, you might know that historically, software inventory was only populated with information for which the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint group actually was also gathering additional data in order to provide us with additional vulnerability information. And of course, people who compared this software inventory with software inventory from a systems management perspective were not too happy because, they were mentioning like, hey, but, I have this and this software installed and MDE is not telling me about that. Now, Microsoft product team addressed this. And now we have the option that when we go into the software inventory list, to basically not only show software, and they call it product code CPE. So if a product code CPE is available, it means that Microsoft will provide us additional context about that software. If there's no CPE available, they will basically just tell us that there is software. So let me show you that as well in a demo. I am here in the correct demo. Yeah. And so we go to vulnerability management. Come on. Software inventory. And as you can see, by default, it will only show information where software where we have additional information. So additional information means, we have a software page that tells us, much more about vulnerabilities, etc. But now, because we might be interested also in software for which Microsoft might not provide additional context, but we still maybe want to know what is installed where. And as you can see here, we now have additional software. Now, this is nice in the UI, but since we are all KQL fans, we want to do that with KQL. So for that, what we can do now is the following. Of course, we're going to go to advanced hunting. Continue query. And basically what you have to look for if you are crawling the device TVM software inventory table and you want to see exactly the same as I showed you before in the UI, you basically have to filter for not available. And then we will get exactly also software vendor, the software name as it's stored into the internal Microsoft database. And of course, we now can do things that we do with KQL is, count numbers of software or, whatever data we'd like to aggregate. Good. And with that, I hand it over to you, Johnny.
Thank you, Alex. So my first part will be working with IOCs. And this month's IOC, which I chose to show a bit around, was the Conti leaks, because all over on Twitter there were IOCs and IOAs of Conti shared, probably by one of the developers. So I'll start sharing my screen. Share screen. There were some lists on Twitter, on some blog posts. And what we'll do, because about 2 weeks ago there were a lot of hits of Conti about IOCs, IOAs. People started sharing and discovering all contents. And one of the things that got shared were all the vulnerabilities that were used by the Conti team. So someone created a nice list by searching with regex through all the chat history. And these CVEs are the one they used for their tactics, or at least they talked about them. And what we can do is by searching also through TVM, you can use that list. So over here, what I've done is I've created a data table, and in the data table, I added all the list, all the items I wanted to see. And then you can compare them to the device TVM software vulnerabilities, so the list with all the vulnerabilities. And you can compare them with a where CVE ID in the list. And then you can create an overview. But for some reasons, currently I don't have any CVEs here. But to make it reverse, you can get an overview of like this. So for instance, if you would have had one of these without the exclamation mark for not in, then you would have seen all the patches that were missing from the list. What we'll also do is we'll share this query in the GitHub, so you can use that. And one of the other posts which I was like to read was this one. Someone was working on all the information, and he gathered a list of all the IP addresses, email addresses, Bitcoin wallets, and from this list you can also do a query in the Defender portal, so you can use it to correlate against email, against network traffic. I've also created 2 short queries for that. So what I've done is I've used the external data operator against the list which I uploaded. I just took all the email addresses from there and I uploaded them, and with this you can use the external data operator with the lists to correlate against the email from the sender from address, from the sender mail from address, so the envelope mail and the mail which is stating it's from, and also the recipient address, so if someone would have mailed outbound to that specific IP address, email address, you would have also got an alert about that. Unfortunately, I haven't created any sample data, but if you use these queries in your own environment, then you will see what is happening. And the same goes for the IP addresses. I also took the list from the blog post, and over there I removed some DNS entries because there was a Google DNS and a Cloud Flare DNS in there, which will make it a bit harder to use this in an operational environment. So over here I've used external data. I also stated it's an IP address, and the data type is string. And then I retrieved the list, and you can compare it against the remote IP or the local IP, depending on which way the traffic is going.
Everybody, wow.
And you can also, of course, use the same lists in Sentinel. You can correlate it against the DNS events at the Office 365 and even the sign-in logs, just to play around with the data. So for instance, if we go back to Sentinel, can do, for instance, I don't have DNS events, so let's use the office activity. And you can, for instance, let's grab the list first. So we want the IP addresses. A list of IP addresses, and then it's the where clients IP in and this way you can use external data in combination also with Sentinel. And you can do the same, like I said, for the sign-in logs and the DNS events, and also with the new asym events. So that would make it even much easier to use. And then today I wanted to explain a bit more about the external data, because you have several ways to use external data. You have the watch lists, KQL functions. You can even import your data in a custom table, or you can use the external data one. And it depends on what you want to use and how you want to use it, which ones you can use. For instance, let's go back. So the watch list one, that was a small option where you can use 3.8 megabytes. And now with the new container, you can use up to 500 megabytes. And the ingestion is free. And well, the storage, if you have a storage account, then you pay a small fee maybe for the storage. And in the old way, you could only use CSVs. And now with the storage containers, you can also use different types of lists. So you can use text files, and it gives you a bit more freedom. Then you have the KQL functions, where you put the data in your function or in your own query. And with that, you can use up to 10,000 characters, or I believe it's 2 megabytes, where you can use to store it in. You don't have any costs, and you can also use multiple types of data, and it's the same speed as the watch list, so it's quite fast. And then you have the custom tables, which can be 500 columns wide, and the length is quite long, but when you use it in a query, you can use up to 500,000 records or 64 megabytes, depending on how you use it. And then you have the ingestion and the Sentinel chart, so it's a bit more costly than in a KQL function or in a watch list. And you can also use multiple data sources, and it's a bit slower than the functions, but not a lot. And then lastly, you have the external data one, where I haven't found any size limits by itself. And the cost, it's depending on where you store your data. And it's also, you have the option to use multiple data types, and it's a bit slower, but it's still for average security work, it's not too slow. And you have several things for the external data. When you do it, you have you have the external data operator, and then you specify the columns and the data types. And then if you're using a storage container or some external storage, you have your storage connection string. And after that, you have your connection, your properties for the external data, which you can use to specify data types, or to ignore the first records, or to map your columns against your table. So when we want to do this, you can go to Sentinel. And now over here I have a sample where I took here What I'll do here is I have the external data operator, and then I've defined several of my columns. The data types are all strings. And over here I have the location where I stored my list. And then in this case, I ignored the first record. And the format is semicolon separate, comma separated file. And when you import it, it looks like a normal table where you can use in your queries. And that works quite nice. And there's also an option if you have some special data and you don't want to share your data with the rest of the world, you can append an H to it, and this will make sure that in the audit logs your data will be hidden, so that no one knows, for instance, or your location, or if you have a key for your storage account, then you maybe don't want to share that with the rest of the world. Was the storage accounts. It's back to you, Alex.
All righty, thank you.
Thank you.
Good. KQL Tools. So continuing with threat intelligence, at times you might find a large list, and you might not want to import it somewhere, but you just want to run an ad hoc query. But on the other hand, you don't want to spend a lot of time, preparing a query. So there's actually a nice tool on SOC Prime. Maybe for those who don't know SOC Prime, it's a very interesting platform all around detection, engineering, hunting, multi CM capable. So if you're coming from Splunk or QRadar, they even provide tooling to convert things. Well, I believe we could talk about SOC Prime separately for hours. But one of the nice features that's actually also available when you have a free community account is the Encoder CTI. So let me quickly demonstrate that also live. Let me find my right browser. Yeah, okay. So here I am. Yeah, so here, I have somewhere my IP addresses, that's maybe I read an article, maybe we are in, to give a more practical example, we are in our security center and we're reading, which hopefully everybody is doing on a daily basis, the threat analytics database. And, there might be some IOCs listed in here, which typically you find in the analytics report. If we scroll down, you might very often find, indicators like SHA values, or, other articles might actually list even more indicators. So instead of having to go and write your query yourself, what you can basically do is you copy those indicators. Then we go to the Encoder CTI tool, and we simply paste it. And it will then, identify that this is a IP address because it remains white. If I were to paste URLs, it would show up in blue. I then specify, which one I want to use as an input. And without any further configuration, of course, I can only, add up to 300 maximum. And there you go. I say generate. And then after a short while, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Yeah. And here we go. And I can simply copy the data and go back into my advanced counting and see if any of my devices eventually had contact with those systems, and hopefully not. Yeah. So yeah, this is I find this a useful tool. You can do the same for domains, URLs, file hashes. You know, if you select the add source IP as well here, that little box, you will notice that currently he's only looking for remote IP, and he's intelligent enough, you know, to basically also include the local IP address from the device network events. If I want to run this, let's say, against another platform, so Microsoft Sentinel, and I say generate again, it is basically going to try to translate that information into the Sentinel language, and will give me a query back that I can use in Sentinel. And even if, here we see he does a union, and basically goes over all tables. Now, if you want to do this more often, it might be wise to then start to fine-tuning things, but at least you don't have to type all those IP addresses or create your own array and let statement and whatever. You can use it ad hoc in this way. Good. Let me quickly switch again. I need to find a tool that I can just push a button to switch content on my screen. Yeah. So here, as we see, I provoked some connections in my Evo Lab VM. That's perfect use. If you want to play with things you shouldn't play on your production machines, use those evaluation VMs. They are far away from you. You can touch bad things from there. Yeah, and that is how you get your results back then. Good. Then, oops, sorry for that. Yeah, next, I would say the stage is to Matt.
All right. So you can see on the slide here, we got some links, but the two important links are the tech community links. These are going to be the blogs for the content that I'm going to be presenting today. So the first is going to be the hands-on KQL workbook that I helped co-develop. And then I'll get into the advanced KQL framework workbook that my teammates actually built. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, and then if you can, paste those links in chat for those who might be interested, and let me know when you can see my screen. We good?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you for the confirmation.
Okay.
All right. So to set the table and provide some context, so this idea came about a year ago after we had a bit of a falling out with a potential opportunity for Sentinel. And one of the pieces of feedback from the customer was that KQL was too hard, which I laughed at. As I'm like, if you are any organization that has databases, you're used to SQL. So it's just like SQL. So less so out of passion and more so out of necessity and anger. I'm just hamming it up a little bit on that, but out of necessity, I was like, we need to have more of a tool to allow new users and existing users to get hands-on experience with KQL. Our documents right now currently don't do enough, and not everybody has access to the Pluralsight KQL course. So
Matt,
I envisioned.
can you zoom in a bit?
Oh, zoom in a bit? Okay, sorry.
No problem
Let's
at all.
see. And in here, I chose my lower resolution screen. Is that a little better or one more?
Andrew, can you comment in the chat? Okay, you can read now. Thanks.
Okay, there we go. So, so basically, I was like, we need a hands-on. Not everyone's got access to the Pluralsight course, so why not build something interactive and say a workbook? And for background, I build way too many workbooks. I spend most of my time in workbooks building ideas that I have and pieces of content. Run at full screen. I'm in a web browser and I don't have a function 11 key, so I unfortunately cannot full screen. I'll just have to zoom in and zoom out as we go. So where this all started, I had built essentially a rough draft of this workbook, and it was not the most smooth to use. So I partnered with one of my colleagues. His name is Steve Fail. He had actually built some Azure functions with code to essentially take user input and run the query against data, return the results, and so on and so forth. We found that version was also too complex, as now customers and users would have to host Azure functions and storage accounts. And so lastly, we came to this current version. So the current version that you're going to be seeing here, and that is available for anyone to use, it actually uses GitHub to host all the data, host all the exercises, host all of the content, and we're just calling that data through the workbook here. So keep that in mind as I go along, that everything that I'm going to be updating and polling and querying is actually going to be being brought in from GitHub. So when I open up this intro to KQL Workbook, I'm just greeted with like a welcome page, basically explaining, hey, this is the workbook. By the end of this right now, you should be getting at least a 200 to maybe low 300 level understanding of KQL. Get that experience that can translate to the job. It also explains the structure, so the operators, the exercises, the data types, so on and so forth, as well as the exercise space. So if you're going to be practicing with the exercises, it's important to know that where to find them, how to use them, and so on and so forth. Lastly, we have workflow. So trying to set, okay, here's the process you should follow in order to use this workbook. And then we just include some helpful links, the KQL public docs, the Pluralsight course, the KQL cheat sheet that is available from tech community. If you have not played around with it, we do have a demo environment for log analytics with demo data in it. So if you don't have access to one, or you don't want to pay for your own, we do have one publicly available as long as you have an Azure account. And then lastly, just looped in the compiled level 400 training for Microsoft Sentinel as a product. So once I go into the overview tab, I can see here I've got some parameters here at the top. When I click down on it, I'm going to get some operators available. The overview tab just has the most common, easy operators to use. So we just try to use like where, take, summarize, project, project away, contains, and has. So, what we felt was the most common operators that are essential to using KQL. We have exercises, so sometimes these operators are going to have multiple exercises. Some of the more complex ones will just have one. Data sets, so sample data that we host in GitHub that could be used for the exercises. Based on what we write, it's going to call on that data. You don't have to manually set it. If you're a user who doesn't want to see the description or the details or the about, you can close that out, just practice. And if you want to see the answer, we do include the answer here at the bottom. So that out of the way, the structure of it, show documentation, don't show answer. The structure is we provide a summary as well as the public doc. So as a new user, I'm going to come here and look at, say, the summary, the quick result of what this operator is all about. I also have a couple examples here to see what it might look like if I'm running a simple query or a more advanced query, and a little bit of a tip on when this should be used, kind of get that mindset of which operator should be used and when. Once I feel comfortable with that, I can scroll down and see the practice area. So the practice area is going to have the question, which I got from above, and a query space that I'm actually going to type up my query. Now, unfortunately, the query space is not as good as the IntelliSense as the regular log analytics workspace. So it might be a little challenging at first. But based on the question, I'm going to see the expected results that I should be getting, what I am getting from my current query, and we have a little checker here off to the side that is going to tell me if I'm right or wrong. So I can see here return one row from the weather table in default order. So I'm just going to say take, since that's the operator I should be practicing, and I can see those match up. My answer is correct. Now I could either continue on with the next operator, or I can start to practice some other ones. So if I wanted to keep going with this operator, I would choose the next one. Now it's like return 6. And lastly, return 10. So this one's pretty simple, but I just realized that one's automatically correct. But as I go along, I'm going to change the operator again, see the link here change, the summary change, the examples, when to use it, and the exercises. So that's the base workflow. Now, in terms of the topics, we do cover the scalars. So once I click on this tab, it's going to update the operators that I'm going to be using. So for scalar, we've got to go between case, date, time, if, sort, and toDynamic. For advanced aggregations, we have argmax, argmin, dcount, dcount_if, max, min, and mv expand. For dataset, we have data table, let, extend, union, and join. And on the current version, we end off on external data. So, for this one, we just say, hey, here's a link that we want you to grab the data from. We want you to use the external operator to external data operator to go fetch that and bring it in. So that's where we end off. But from there, I do have a couple areas that I'm going to be updating content for, hopefully in the next week. My goal for this was supposed to be the beginning of the month, but things always come up over time. So I'm going to be adding operators for string operations. I'm going to be adding some operators that allow you to learn how to generate your own anomalies, and miscellaneous operators that we feel are important, or we feel that not a lot of users are aware that those operators exist. So you might be asking, well, if I don't have my own environment, how can I use the workbook, or let's say I don't have access to data. If we scroll down here, I do have a button programmed to open up the demo workspace. And so without having to leave the workbook now, say that I don't want to use the demo data, or I just want to use real data, I can click on that button to open up the workspace itself. And now I can just start querying the regular workspace. And so if I want to say practice take on a real workspace environment, I can do that. So, but that's the quick rundown of it. Does anyone have any comments, questions, feedback on?
Yeah.
All right, let's go right ahead with it. Did someone have a question? I thought I heard someone.
I think I do have a question, because is this like really easy to maintain if you want to add another feature to it, or can you maybe explain a bit more how you created a workbook like this? Because when I create a workbook, it's usually some charts, and that's about it.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we wanted to go into that, so I'm happy to go over it. So as I had mentioned, this workbook is built on top of GitHub. So if I go to the public Microsoft Sentinel GitHub repo, and I go under Tools, I can find the Intro to KQL folder. This folder is going to host all of the sample data as well as all of the exercises. So the structure of it is, and I'm going to explain how to upload your own if you'd like. That is something with this next update that I'm producing, I'm going to detail. But basically, the content that you see listed here is written in Markdown and then converted to base64 so that it's hosted here and it gets decoded once it's called into the workbook. And then we also assign it a tab name, so the tabs are going to align with whichever tab that we're currently on. So overview ties back to overview, and then we list the section which maps to this this drop down here. And then we get into the exercises, which maps to this drop down here. So every time I'm calling something, it's just going to this and it's saying, okay, what tab am I on? Which section am I on? Which exercise is being called? Now, in terms of the exercises, we're just listing out the name, the question itself, the data set that it's going to be using. So our workbook is actually going to be checking, okay, which data set it's going to be using. So that way the user doesn't have to go change it themselves. And then lastly, we have base64 encoded our answer. So again, once it gets called by the workbook, show answer, it just shows up in regular KQL. They won't have to decode it themselves to see what it is. So that's essentially the flow of how the different tabs work and all the exercises. It's all the way down. Like I mentioned, if I pull up my Visual Studio Code, I'm currently, updating this. It's probably going to be hard to read, but it's the same format. So I just, copy the structure, paste it in, update all the information, make sure that any write-up summary I've got is encoded in base64, and then I upload it to GitHub to update the file. So as a user, if you want your own sample data, your own exercises, what you just need to do is host this folder in a personal repo. So for example, if I duplicate this tab and go to my repositories and my version of the Microsoft Sentinel GitHub repo and go to tools. So I got the folder hosted here. All I would need to do is when I go into the workbook, right now it's pointing to that repository. So that main Microsoft Sentinel repository, I'm hosting the same thing. So I would just have to change it to my ownership and my repository path. That's going to allow me to now, like I said, update the content, add my own exercises, and the workbook is just going to pull it from my personal repository instead of the official Microsoft Sentinel repository. So outside of that, we also do a hard pull on the exercises, the JSON, and the data sets. So I talked about how we host those here, and I went back too far. Here and data sets. So we just do a hard pull so that we do have like a dynamic copy in the workbook to improve the performance a bit and make sure that every query is not trying to call it. They could just refer to what we've got hidden up here. So in terms of if I add my own content, as soon as I redirect the workbook to point to my personal repo and I have the file hosting all the exercises updated, for example, the strings like I'm updating right now, it would automatically show up. So like I said, I'm going to have it documented when I do post the spring update, and it'll be a lot more easy to follow and easy to read once that is available. So does that help with what you were looking for?
Yeah, definitely. It's It's really cool how things get together this way.
Yeah, and to break it down a little bit more, so that we're not just pulling regular data. You were mentioning just charts. So the GitHub repository is just a simple text box. So the user will define that once they deploy it. So I'll change this back to Azure. But they can change this at any time. We do not set it statically. It's statically set to the main one, but if a user wants to change it, like I said, they just have to swap it out. For the contents, this one is going to use the external data operator. So you were talking a little bit about that earlier in the slides. So this does use the external data operator to pull that data in from the repo. So in this case, instead of statically listing the repository path, we're just pulling whatever the user is putting into this section here. So it's dynamically updating. It's going to go grab that data and bring it in to improve performance. Same with the JSON in this case. Since we were grabbing the raw file, instead of using external data, we're just running a HTTP GET call on the path to grab the file. So again, mainly used for just having that locally, not statically defined for performance purposes. And then again, we're back to the external data to bring that data in. So after I get that updated in GitHub, all of this is going to be updated. And like I said, it's going to populate the sections down here. And as you can see, I broke it after tampering with it. So any other questions about the intro to KQL Workbook?
Not that I'm seeing in the chat.
Okay. Well, we're done with this one, so I don't need to. Oh, no, it's populating. I don't need to save any changes I made. That is the wrong environment. 1 sec. I don't know why it signed me out so quickly. I had it ready to go right at the beginning of the call. So pivoting to what my colleagues have built. So they've built a workbook called Advanced KQL for Microsoft Sentinel. So we ironically were working on both workbooks at the same time, and we actually didn't initially communicate that we were building these workbooks. So we were building the same thing, but I will explain the differences here. So the Intro to KQL workbook is more of a hands-on interactive practice workbook. You go into it as a new user, an existing user, expecting to read and challenge yourself while practicing. The level that you should achieve by the end of that workbook is about 200 to low 300, like I mentioned. As time goes on, I'm going to be adding more content to make it, 300 to 400 level. But the Advanced KQL for Microsoft Sentinel workbook is more of a use case guideline, not so much hands-on practice. So this is going to list different topics based on use case. So as you can see, aggregation, converting value, correlation, so on. They built it out so that it's more of a 300, 400 level with examples of how to do specific use cases that customers might care about or users might care about. So this is more of just reading and referencing versus the Intro to KQL, which is more hands-on practice to learn and grow. So going into this workbook, the way that they've built it out, and this is probably going to be awful with how much I'm zoomed in. So each of these buttons, once you click on it, it is going to expand out a section below. So as you can see, I've clicked on aggregation, and it's going to bring out and build out what they've defined by that button. So say you are a user looking to do aggregations, learn about the different ways you could do aggregations, or you might know about aggregations, but have a use case that you want to see an example of. So I click on aggregations, I can quickly see a quick summary, just talking about what the aggregations are going to be doing and where you could use them. And here is where they have the use case reference. So this section is going to be called what I want to, and then it's going to say, summarize activity frequency across time, summarize by minimum or maximum column values, and lastly, perform counts by various criteria. When I click on that, it's going to expand that out even more. And it's going to say, okay, step 1, you're going to summarize activity, topic 1, summarize activity frequency across time. For this, you're going to either use summarize, or you're going to use summarize and count to do the aggregations. Here is a sample example or sample query for returning account activity over 24 hours. Instead of trying to build it out like the intro to KQL, this one just gives it to you for a reference or quick use. Additionally, summary of count failed logons, by an Azure resource. Here's the query. I don't have to go find it. There's my example. And as I keep going down, they build out some more complex queries to show, where it might fit in with some more in-depth or more specific based queries that a customer might want to run. They then added buttons again for pivoting to the demo workspace. So if you want to copy one of those samples and paste it into the demo workspace, you can see how it runs. They have it predefined to run some queries already. So we can see that one of the larger ones, I don't know why it's broken, but we can see one of the larger ones is already built out for us. We don't have to try to build it by hand. So it's there as a quick reference. But they also added the option to run one of the sample queries in my own workspace. So they're the same workspace, but say I'm a user, instead of going to the demo workspace, is actually going to go to whichever workspace my Microsoft Sentinel environment is currently using. So a nice, jump between demo environment or my own environment to see, demo or practical use case based on my own data. And then as I continue on past that, they're going to say, here are some analytic rules or hunting queries that you should go check out that use the operators that are shown. So in this case, we talked about aggregation. Go check out these references to see how they apply that to real world threats, real world attacks, and also get an idea of where it fits into queries. So I see Andrew put something in chat. Think seeing it this way helps to make it clearer to follow. Doing training from different places been pretty hard to figure out. That's good to hear. I'll relay that feedback to them to let them know that their workflow is easy to follow. So as I go on, I click through. Now it's like, okay, topic 2. Now I can see the operators are different for that use case. But same structure, here are some examples. Here are some sample use cases. Do I want to try it? Here are some analytic rules, some hunting queries, some workbooks, some, so on and so forth that are going to be using those operators in this use case. So that's the workflow of this workbook. And as mentioned, okay, thanks for clarifying, Andrew. So, they have this list of use cases with breakdowns of that content based on the workflow that I just shown. So, if you're looking for, say, anomalies, again, follow the workflow. Here's what I would use to do that. Here's what I would use to do that. Do I want to practice it? Does anything today already use this that I could reference? So, any questions or comments about this workbook? And in terms of how this one was built, it's a lot of static information that they built out for this one. So, buttons for groups and, everything's hidden. So, it all depends on when you click on buttons, and then it's going to be statically defined, based on what you're clicking on. So they built it out pretty deep, and adding a lot of conditions for things to show up depending on what the user clicks on and what it wants to view. So, yeah. Anything?
Not a question, but yeah, kudos to the people who built this. I've already started using it occasionally, especially spying at the functions, because I believe the examples provided in here are often more useful than the ones on the docs page.
Definitely agree with that. Unfortunately, our docs don't set a very high bar, so.
So on docs, sometimes I'm missing the relation to something in the real world. It's sometimes very theoretical, and in here it allows me to better relate to what I want to do with the functions.
And one thing I forgot to mention, I did put a button in the intro to KQL workbook. Of course, now that I'm trying to demo something, it's not going to work. To where, all right, if you have the advanced KQL workbook deployed in the environment, you can click the button, and it's supposed to open up this workbook here from this workbook. It's just, I guess, I did something wrong, and I'll need to update that. But talking about the use case examples, like you said, real world better than the docs. As a user using the intro to KQL workbook, you could also pivot back and forth with this workbook to reference those examples.
Yeah, they're easier. Even if I have my own data, I can look at the raw data, and especially as we develop KQL queries, and I'll talk about that later. At times you want to trust the output that your query produces, and in that case, it makes sense that you can look at the raw data and then play with the functions of your own data and see, if it makes sense. Even if in our environment, you work with a very small data set, like you take 100 computers, 100 devices that you or IP ranges that are familiar to you, and then you can basically better confirm that the query is probably giving you the right information, as in the event where you're just working with some sample data.
Exactly. And the last thing to mention is, seeing that you and the KQLCafe are actively, learning and talking about KQL. And once you start using these tools, we do have feedback forms. Hopefully these are still valid. But we do have feedback forms so that once you go through it, if you are like, this was great, but I would like to see XYZ operator that you didn't include, we can reference those feedback forms to see what we might be missing, see what would be valuable to customers, and we can get that updated.
Cool. If you can share the links, we're also putting them in the show notes, and then people can also answer them later on if they're watching the recording. Cool. That's link 1. And link 2, awesome. I think for me, I really like the second one, the advanced KQL workbook, because it's, for me, always when you're working on a new operator and you have to think how to start, and you have some samples, that really helps, because some functions are a bit more descriptive than others. And if you want to take a new one, then it's really nice.
Absolutely.
Cool.
But that's all from me, so I'll hand it back to you.
Hey, thanks, Mac. Quite some inspiration. Actually, I'm going to do a little bit of an improvisation before I get to my official topic, because from my daily life, let's share a few things. Let's take how you can learn by spying how others do things, or how easily you can modify things. So first, just in case you didn't know, even if you have those official workbooks open and they don't provide what you want, like in this case, I wanted to get a quick list of exporting all the rules, but where is the download or export button? It isn't here because obviously the person who created this one didn't consider that as important. So it's a cool thing. We can simply click on edit, and then like Matt mentioned, sometimes you have to click on edit a few times within the workbook until you get to the location where you want to be. But then, for example, we can simply say, okay, give me that export button, and I'm done editing. And now I have my rules, and here we go. I have an export. Another example, how at least I do use or misuse workbooks to learn KQL, is because we have those beautiful, reports at times. Where we see, oh, that's the wrong one. I wanted to show actually, yeah, this one. The usage report, it shows some nice graphics. And sometimes we want to know, well, how do they get to that data, right? And again, when you go through those workbooks, you can basically spy on the queries that are behind the workbooks, copy paste them, transform them, and of course you might have to replace the variables that are stored within the workbook with your own data and filters, and then you can basically steal in a nice way useful queries that people are creating. That's one way how I also at times try to understand and enhance my KQL experience. Good. So let's move then to our next topic. And that's about, what did we do this month? So, I had a request from a customer as they plan to automate some things. And this is all around patch compliance. Patch compliance of servers and clients. So moving back to my demo environment, that should be here. Yeah, great. So let's give the teaser. We're in here. And on a side note, yes, we use Microsoft Endpoint Config Manager and Windows Update for Business, and we hope that everything is configured correctly and that all of our clients are patched correctly, but reality often is different because there can be many things that go wrong, but especially if we rely on our systems management tools to monitor compliance, and if those systems management tools itself, for some reason, maybe the agent is broke or it's not even reporting information back, then I'd like to mention to those people that have the luxury of using Defender for Endpoint that actually, you can do a counter measurement and see how you are about patching. So let's take Windows Server 2019 as a software. We see that in this environment, we have, 14 servers deployed. And we see also that we have some missing KBs. So this is basically showing us, that we have, if we pick January, in January, we have a few devices, 5 devices where the patch is missing. So those systems, for some reason have an issue installing security updates. Now, all nice if we have this in a UI. But now we might want to do some automation. We want to maybe create a flow process, a playbook, where we're going to alert people about, servers may be missing a lot of patches. So that meant for me, my first exercise was, how can I reproduce this information here in KQL? And I can tell you, I learned quite a lot. Although I pretend to know KQL good, I'm actually not that good, but I'm still learning. So let me quickly elaborate a little bit on the query I did here and what I used here. So of course we have all the information in the device TVM software vulnerabilities, and I'm only interested in those that are related to Windows Server. Then I'm also interested in only those that have the recommended security update, because this missing KB information is not available for any software product. Right now, if we wanted to know, by the way, this is what I do a lot. Let's quickly mess up this one. If I want to know about any products that actually have this recommended update, I say software name. Then I get a list, of all the software where actually it is telling me about missing recommended security updates. Okay, let's go back and adjust this again. If he lets me do that, yeah. Okay. Now that I have that list, what I'm now going to do, I'm actually only interested in the, to get one record per system. So I do a distinct on the device ID, the recommended security update, the update ID, and the software name itself. Then I join that information with device info, because I only want to have that information related to devices that are actually onboarded. Because since we have the device discovery, and this device discovery for not onboarded devices sometimes is also giving us data back about vulnerabilities. So I want to keep the data legal. I only want to have onboarded, and I also, in case of duplicate IDs, I want to make sure that I only have the latest record and the most active device. I then join that, and I do some summarizing here. And I've played a lot with make set and make list this month. So a cool thing is, as Matt Zorik mentioned in our last show, with make set, we're basically creating a distinct list of references. So I only want to have the device count once in the list by software, by update, by the ID, and then I'm also adding some OS version info and distribution info to it. And then now I'm gonna use a trick that I actually stole from Johnny, and that is basically, counting the total number of what is here in this make set. So my output is basically twofold. If I run query here, if my browser is not frozen, I hope it's okay. Let's do this again. Yeah. So in my output, I have the bulletin. I have the ID, these are the security KB number. I have the total exposed devices, but I also have the devices itself in a set here. I do by operating system. This is especially also useful when you do the same query on Windows clients, because then you get also the OS build version info. And in this case, I'm just filtering on server 2019 for the sake of demonstration. And I'm only filtering on this test device, but of course I could No, now we're on this query again. Okay, I thought I'm doing good before the session to prepare all the tabs, but okay, so we see March, total exposed devices, January, 5, and now let me do that again here, and I only want this one, yeah, and if we're going to compare that, we will see that we have exactly the same number here. So we can roll back. And that's also something what I mentioned before to Mac, if you work with data that's familiar to you, if you work with small data sets, it's way easier, to kind of compare if your data is actually, correct, because, and especially when you have a UI where you can go back and basically verify that the results that are produced here, that you can circle back and verify it on the other end here as well. So as always, we'll share this. This can, of course, be adjusted to your needs. As mentioned, the missing KBs are currently supported by Windows Server, Windows 10 or 11 clients, also for .NET Framework. So yeah, take a look, and our next step is that we're basically going to run this automatically by means of a Azure playbook, and then yeah, send some messages to the respective owners or responsible people for those individual systems that they please might take a look at, getting their servers updated. Yeah. Good. The next real world example that came across me was while working with a customer at the very end of rolling out MFA. And during MFA, so conditional access and multi-factor authentication, people, of course, always have a reason for exclusions. And we're now basically cleaning up those exclusions. And for that, we did basically the following in KQL. Let me see where I stored that query. This is in my tenant. Yeah. And it should be here. Yeah. Here it is. Okay. So let's imagine I had this Azure AD group that's called, security group conditional access exclude. I look at the time range, and of course, this depends on how long your data retention is. But I'm just looking back, 180 days, and the time frame as well in this case. And the nice thing is that, in the identity info table, I basically have information about the group membership of users, right? So if you have Azure Sentinel deployed, let me copy paste that quickly. We can basically, if why is that? Okay, there should be a table, of course. Yeah. All good. Yeah, no data, even better. Okay. So we see Sam, and because I did an MV expand, I basically read from all the users in the column, group membership, which we can see here. He's a member of marketing. If I go further, he's also a member of, other groups, etc. But now that we know that within the identity info table, we do have group membership information from Azure AD groups or on-prem AD synced groups into Azure AD. I can actually find all users that are a member of a specific group. And in this case, these were the users that, were temporarily allowed to bypass conditional access, typically, like some special accounts that still needed basic auth or whatever. But now we're cleaning up and we basically want to reduce that list. So the next thing we do is we're joining this list basically with the signing logs. So yeah, the task was, compare the members of the group, with our signing logs. And the result is then as following. And I did a project away because I don't want to expose my members that I have in such a group. But you get the idea. So if you would here see, and this is also something I usually do when I join things. In the beginning, I tend to put something that came from the left as well as from the right on the same row, which allows me to kind of get an idea, okay, my join might have worked because I see the same UPN name on both sides, etc. So in this case, it would tell me that where I have a last logon, that's because in this time frame, there was a last logon, although here we see only on the 24th of January for this user account that you can just imagine a name here. And for those users where there is no last logon, they didn't log on at all in the last 180 days. So I can probably safely start removing those users from this exclusion group. Yeah. And basically, I believe, you can use this type of idea for any, type of cleanup activities, where you have devices, users in a group, users, I should say, because devices aren't in the identity info table yet. But, as long as I want to clean up users, I have them in an Azure AD group, this is one way how you can, bring both worlds together, signing logs, activity logs versus, members of a specific group. Yeah. So I hope you found that useful or maybe a good inspiration. And otherwise, I'll hand it over back to Johnny.
Cool. So let's share my screen, because this month what I've been working on, it was a query I started by just looking at which devices or which accounts had successful sign-ins from everywhere. So what I did is I've created a list. This list is also in one of the default detections in Sentinel, but I've added a few more, and I believe that these events are all the events that have a successful password. It can be that maybe the device isn't onboarded correctly, or maybe something else. So for instance, let's see, let's summarize arg max time rated arg by result type. And project this. So there were events where I did not pass the MFA, or where the application wasn't available in the tenant, or where I haven't enrolled the second factor. And then I was playing around a bit with other lists, because in another tenant, what I saw was that there were attempts to sign in from a VPS or a VPN IP block. So what I did, I created a list of several blocks. I've also put it on GitHub, and I'll also share this query for later use. And these queries, I put in all the net blocks of some providers. So CDN77 is a large cloud provider, but in there I also have Cloud Radium, Cloud Diver, DigitalOcean, And what I was thinking with these ranges is it's okay if you have a outbound connection or outgoing connection through your firewall. That would be it could be possible that someone is using some of the external data, but you don't want to see this IP addresses, for instance, in your sign-in logs. So what I've done is I've matched the list, combined it with the success results. And then what I'll do is I've created a function so I can reuse this piece of query. And I've used the sign-in logs, the interactive user logs, and the AAD server principal names, but also the office activity, because maybe someone is using Teams or Outlook from those ranges. And then I did a union to see if there are connections. And that way I was able to identify if there were IP addresses from a VPS location. And what I did notice was a lot of these location also hosted VPN providers. So for instance, I saw logons to Teams from a ExpressVPN or from a Proton VPN. And that way, besides the normal the Azure Active Directory P2 options, where you have the impossible travel and all the other great events, you can also have a low budget or easier variant to discover these kind of possible malicious sign-ins. And that way you can monitor your network. And also because it was really nice to play with the watch lists and with the external data, I thought it was great to also share this query for this month. And we'll also put the query on the GitHub after the show. I think we're set for this one. And we can continue to the last part of the show. Because last month, the first month, we did we had our own KQL challenge. And the challenge was to create detections. In the second month, we've created on GitHub a couple of questions, which we shared the last show. And this month, we saw a really cool form from Matt Zorich, where he created a Windows Forms table with some questions regarding KQL. We thought it would be really nice to use that one for this month's KQL challenge. I've also, Alex already pasted it in the chat. And it's cool, Andrew. It's Rota is doing a wonderful job indeed with the KQL store. We also we have our own mug, but also this month he created a mug for the 365 days of KQL, and it's also helping the hospitals. Really cool idea to help. And for this month, the challenge was to fill in this form. There are like 11 questions. And it's easy, apprehendable questions, and I would say good luck to you all.
Maybe worth mentioning, so the questions relate to KQL queries that you can run in the Microsoft public LA demo tenant. So we should all get maybe the same results or similar ones. Yeah.
Cool. I think we're now up to the last part of the show. Does anyone have any questions regarding KQL or use cases or show topics?
Okay. Well, as long as we get live audience and we see.
Cool. Another question from Roxanne.
Yeah.
Any TI links that you would recommend? I think it depends, because what I use a lot also in for Defender is there are let's see, you have the Feodo block list.
Yeah.
Say a short block list which you can use. You have the recommended block list, and I use this one a lot.
Abuse.ch. There you basically have them all together.
And you also have the emerging threats proof point, I guess. Block list. It's this guy. And you also have the Cisco Talos Snorts block list. And Talos, let's see where I have it. Is this guy? No.
Yeah, Johnny.
Yes.
Abuse.ch, if you go to abuse.ch.
Oh yeah, just abuse. Sorry, abuse.ch.
Yeah, there. If you scroll down a little bit, you will find different sources. They also provide interfaces, API interfaces,
Oh, cool.
to pull down data. Yeah. Maybe yeah. In the days before I fell in love with KQL, it was PowerShell. So here I just pasted you a link, a PowerShell module to basically pull URL house IOCs through PowerShell or list them. Nowadays, of course, we would, try to retrieve the data otherwise, but with abuse.ch, many of the feeds, you either have to download them. Not sure if all of them are available through external data.
Yes, those lists are indeed dynamic. And depending on the type, they get updated between 15 minutes and some are getting updated, I think, within 24 hours.
Yeah.
And I think a last one, which was nice to mention, they already talked about it at Blue Hat. Because the team of Grey Noise is making, they have the paid lists. You have the paid plans, but they're also working with the emerging threats, and they get the CV, the IOCs based on the specific CVEs. So that's also a nice one to get and to play with. Let's see where they have it. You are welcome. Let's see. Emerging should be in here somewhere. Once you log in, you have with the free account, you can see the emerging threats one for the new CVs.
Speaking about emerging threats, if you instead of switching, if you can go to the link I just shared with you. Yeah. So if you scroll down, talking about Microsoft Sentinel, if you use the taxi connector, basically the feeds that are listed here are free as well. And configuring the taxi connector is quite easy. And then you will get all the data into your Sentinel threat intelligence table, which means that that one I can actually show in my own tenant, which gives you plenty of stuff to look at. I just connected to the standard ones that were on the free page we just shared, and that should give you enough data for, I believe, roughly 1.6 million indicators that you can look at, and these are all the threat intelligence sources that you get basically out of the box by leveraging the ones here, taxi. The ones that you can configure here, you can update, of course, them more than once, but I'm cautious of resources because it's my test environment anyway. Yeah, again, let's go back to KQL again. Take a look at the threat intelligence, and yeah, none right now in and expiration date now. Let me take the other one. Next steps, summarized by 1 hour bins. By the way, another cool thing I use a lot lately, where I go summarize count. Yeah. By the way, summarize count, and then bin time generated 1 day, and then you can make those nice graphs that Matt Zorich showed us last week. Yeah, so that's all I can add as well to threat intelligence data and sources.
Yes, and then another remark by Maurice that he said, what about Alien Vault and MISP, etc.? So Alien Vault is also a good source, and they also have their generic list, which you can use as a external table. And you can also use their they have also a taxi integration where you can within Alien Vault you mark pulses as sort of a favorite, and when you mark it as a favorite, you're also able to ingest those. And MISP is also a good source. It once was the malware information sharing platform, but nowadays, since they do more than just malware, you can replace the M with anything you like. So it can be the mythical information sharing platform, magical, whatever you like. And they have some really good sources vetted by Circle, the team who also builds MISP. There are also ways to ingest other sources. I think by default there are about 70 sources, and you can also link those link MISP to your Sentinel or to your Defender portal.
Yeah. I just shared another one. I just remembered I ran across the other night. That's another interesting page where you basically find an overview of all possible third-party threat intelligence providers that have, in one or the other way, an integration, be it through playbooks or by directly ingesting into the Microsoft Security Graph, or through taxi connector, etc.
I think it's also nice if we maybe do in one of the coming shows, we'll do a bit of demo with MISP. We're also working on a integration that you can link to a MISP to a taxi server, but that's one for one of the coming shows.
Yeah, so let us know what keeps you busy or what you want us to focus on. We can talk a little bit about what's coming up next. So for all those that are in the working in the space of detection engineering, you'll be glad to hear that we have Olaf Hartong planned as our guest in April. Olaf is very known, at least to those people dealing with those things regularly, for detection engineering, KQL. He also has his Falcon Friday, I believe, GitHub repo with some very cool KQL queries, maybe also to learn from. And then in May, I forgot your name, Johnny. Who do we have in May?
Oh, Roberto Rodriguez.
Okay. Yeah.
That's his researcher from Microsoft, and he does a ton of projects from he did Simuland, he did also for threat hunting. He has the Monitor project, he has the open source threat intelligence. He has a lot of projects, and also be talking with him about KQL and how he can relate it to his line of work. That would be also a really cool session.
So yeah, definitely reason enough to join us in the upcoming sessions. I would like to thank again Matt for being our guest and for showing his and the team's great work in both of the workbooks you showed us. I think, at least for me, a double inspiration. First of all, crazy what you can all do with workbooks. More than just display data. By the way, I just learned that you also can integrate into workbooks, for example, references to the Sentinel provider API. So if before I showed that list of all the rules, analytic rules that are active, and there was no way I could find a table where those rules are. But actually the workbooks works in that way, that it's going back to the API and reads out from the Sentinel API the analytic rules as well as the analytic rule templates that are available. So yeah, again, Matthew, many thanks for joining us today and giving some inspiration and some insight into the use and the making of those workbooks.
And I think also a big thanks to our guests for joining us in the last almost 2 hours. It's really nice that you join us in our KQL journey. And also, if you want to share of any questions, you know where to find us. We can be reached on our Teams handles over here. We can be reached on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on you name it. We got a Discord channel, but we're still figuring out a bit the right way to use it. So if someone wants to help or promote it, be our guest. And I think for now, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. And see you next time, hopefully. And as always, the show notes will be there in a couple of days, as well as the recording at KQLCafe.com. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.